I am privileged to grace the screen this beautiful day. My name is Peace and I welcome you to my YouTube channel. If this is your first time seeing this beauty, please subscribe to my channel so you can get premium content from the land of the rising sun, Japan. Today's topic is very interesting. It's always interesting. Like I try to, talk about interesting topics. I will be talking about how to bring your spouse over to Japan. If you're preparing to or if you're planning to move to Japan, what you can do or how you can, bring your spouse over to Japan after you have arrived Japan. And the thing is Japan is different. The process here is different from the way it is in other countries. That is why I am here to give you detailed information on how you can bring your spouse to Japan. It took a while for me to come up with this information because I was doing my research and also asking people, asking friends that have done same. So without wasting time, let's get right into the video. So if you want to bring your spouse to Japan, you would have to apply for a Japanese spouse visa. A Japanese spouse visa is a visa for spouses or dependents of Japanese citizens or residents of Japan. So if you are married to a Japanese and you are from a foreign country, you would have to apply for a spouse visa. Or if you are working in Japan and your spouse is outside Japan and you want to bring them to Japan, you would have to apply for a Japanese spouse visa. So now, who needs a spouse visa? Like I said before, if you are married to a Japanese and you are from a different nationality, you will need to apply for a spouse visa. If you are married to a resident of Japan, or resident, whether temporary or permanent resident, you will need to apply for a spouse visa. And the first step to apply for this Japanese spouse visa is to get a certificate of eligibility. That is the first document you require. Every foreigner who enters Japan for temporary reasons needs to have a certificate of eligibility. So if you get a job in Japan and you have to come here, or you want to come here to school, you will need a certificate of eligibility from the immigration service in Japan before you can apply for visa. So that is one of the documents required to apply for a visa. Since you have to have this certificates before you enter Japan, your spouse who is in Japan or your sponsor who is in Japan would have to apply on your behalf. So all you need to do is just to send them the relevant document and they will have to apply on your behalf. So I'm going to answer the question if one can move with their spouse immediately. So like I just explained, you will need the COE before you can apply for visa, meaning one person will have to come to Japan and then apply for the COE for the other person. So you can't come together. You can only come together if both of you get different jobs and you get your COE from your employers differently. Then you can then move to Japan at the same time. Otherwise, it's not possible. So the next thing I will talk about are the documents you need to apply for a COE. You could just jot them down if you have a pen and a paper beside you. I would also leave it on the screen. So the first document you need is your wedding certificate. You need your wedding certificate as a proof that you are married to your spouse. The second is your personal statement in Japanese. So your spouse will have to write a personal statement why he or she wants to bring you over to Japan. So this has to be written in Japanese, like professional Japanese, not the Google translation Japanese. So the third requirement is your tax certificate or pay slip. So these are the documents your spouse who is in Japan would have to provide in order to apply for a COE for his other spouse who is outside Japan. Okay. So in Japan, you can only get a tax certificate after you've worked for a year. So if you want to bring your spouse over and you have been in Japan for less than a year, you can submit your pay slips. So that would suffice for the tax certificate. So the next document you need is your wedding photos. It's also a proof to show that you are married. And the third is your international passport. So the next is your passport photograph. You have to submit the passport photograph of your spouse. Next is employment certificate. You would have to contact your employer to give you an employment certificate, and you would need that certificate to apply for the COE. The last document you would need is your residence certificate. You would have to go to your city hall to get a residence certificate. Okay, not a residence card, but a residence certificate. So if you have all these documents, then you can now proceed to applying for COE for your spouse. How do you apply for COE? There are two ways to apply for the COE. You could go to the immigration office and apply for the COE, or you could apply online, whichever way. And the COE process takes about 1 to 3 months. So you have to wait between 1 to 3 months before you can get your COE, or before you can get a response from the immigration office concerning your COE application, or concerning the COE application. The certificate of eligibility is not a visa. It does not take the place of a visa. It only shows that you meet the requirement set by the Japanese immigration services and that you are eligible to enter Japan. So when you get your COE, then you can proceed to apply for a spouse visa. Like I said before at the beginning of this video, that you cannot come together with your spouse, because one person has to be here in order to apply for the COE of the other person, that is the spouse or dependent. So I'm going to answer this question of how long can I be in Japan before I apply for a COE for my spouse, or before I can invite my spouse over. So as long as you have the relevant document and a stable job, you are eligible to, you can invite your spouse at any time, as long as you have the document and a stable job. And if you're coming as an ALT, or if you're already an ALT, like an assistant language teacher in Japan, it would be easier, because everyone knows that an ALT job is kind of stable. You know, you get stable income. So they're not thinking of how, or you're not thinking of how to feed yourself and your spouse when they come. Like, you guys are not thinking about that. You know, you have a stable income, you have a stable job, so you can apply whenever time you want. But it is, you know, better to wait for, you know, at least 3 to 6 months, because before you can, you know, invite your spouse. It is just, I think it is just safer to do that. But if you can't wait and you have all the documents, you meet all the requirements, then fine, you can invite your spouse. So I want to talk about the income. Before one can invite their spouse to Japan, they need to earn a certain amount of money yearly. So if you are just inviting your spouse with no child, you should have an annual income of 700,000 yen. So if you're inviting your spouse and your child, like one child, you should earn an annual income of 1.4 million yen. Anyone with a decent job here in Japan should earn more than these amounts, I think. So it's fair. Another thing is, when you have your COE and you have gone to your embassy, you've gone to the embassy to apply for your visa with your other documents, the duration of visa your spouse would get depends on the number of visa the other spouse in Japan has. So if you have a year visa left, your spouse would be given, at most a year visa. Your spouse cannot get 2 years visa when you have like 1 year visa. The duration of visa your spouse would get would be the same as what you have left. So I'm going to answer this question of, can my spouse work in Japan? In Japan, things are different. Things are done differently. After you've gotten your spouse visa and you're now in Japan, you cannot work with that visa. You can only work when you apply for a work permit. So you would have to go to the immigration office to apply to get a work permit. So when you get this work permit, you would be able to work part-time. Part-time. So spouse visa with a work permit allows you to work for 28 hours every week. So you would be able to work for just 28 hours and part-time, not full-time. But you can switch this visa. I know some people are rolling their eyes, but it is what it is. It's Japan. Things are different. I know it's different because in other countries, your spouse can work for unlimited hours, right? But here, the spouse can only work with the spouse visa plus working permit for 28 hours every week. So if you don't have that work permit, you would not be allowed to work. And if you do, it will be considered illegal. So, but if your spouse should have a full-time job and the employer is willing to sponsor her visa, why am I saying her? To sponsor your spouse visa, then the visa can be changed. And it's gonna change from spouse visa to instructor's visa. That is, if you get an English teaching job, your visa will change from spouse visa to instructor's visa, and you will be permitted to work full-time. So it's not a big deal. Like, it's not bad. If you have a teaching job and you're moving to Japan very soon, or if you're here already in Japan and you want to bring your spouse, it's not, don't let this discourage you from doing that, because your spouse can also get a full-time job and change his or her visa to an instructor visa or any other kind of visa that permits him or her to work full-time. Hope that is clear. So I got a question of someone asking if her spouse will need a proof of fund. I don't think your spouse will need a proof of fund because you are the sponsor. That is why they need your pay slips or your tax certificate. I mean, your pay slip shows how much you earn, and that is why I said you need to have an annual income of 1.4 million yen. That is, if you have one child, if you're bringing your spouse and a child, you should have an annual income, or you should receive an annual income of 1.4 million yen. And if you're just inviting your spouse, that should be 700,000 yen. So your spouse does not need to provide any proof of funds at all because you are the sponsor. But if you're coming as an ALT, like an English assistant language teacher, and your spouse also is coming for the same job, I mean, if both of you are coming differently, then both of you would have to, show your proof of funds differently. You would have to send that to your employer. Your employers are going to apply for your COE. So they are your sponsors differently. You'll get your COE from your different employers, and then you can move to Japan together. That's the only way you can come to Japan with your spouse. I hope it is clear. So that is all for the spouse visa. That is all the information I have, and that is all I have shared. I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, you can leave it on the comment section, or you can send me a DM on Instagram. So my Instagram handle is on the screen. I'd also put the link to my Instagram in the description box, so please check. Thank you so much for taking out time to watch this video. I'd see you again in my next video. Bye for now.